starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Just webinar, CRP, what does it all mean? I'm Martin Lyons, Business Development Director here at Just, and I hope you've got your tea or coffee in front of you, or even an iced coffee this morning. Looks like it's going to be another hot one today, but joining us in the hot seat today, of course, are our guests from Finalytic, and of course, your own consultancy firm. It's Dave Elliott's with us today. Morning, Dave.
Morning, Martin.
You well?
I'm very, very well. A bit warm around the edges, as you say.
Just a bit.
Very nice.
Jolly good. And we've also got Tony Clark here. Tony will be known to many of you from our Think articles and a few other bits and pieces. Welcome, Tony.
Morning.
Good to see you once again. Big subject, this CRP, to look at this morning. Lots of different elements to it. So we're going to kick right off, but perhaps a bit of housekeeping as usual to begin with. You do have the opportunity today to ask questions, which will come to at the end of the session. But if you have any other sort of technological issues or issues hearing us or whatever it might be, then do click on the right-hand side of your screen. You should see a box that comes up a little bit like we've got on the screen there, where it enables you to virtually at least raise a hand to ask a question. Anna is on the controls here, waiting for those questions to come in. And perhaps more relevance to this subject is any questions you've got specifically on the areas that we're going to be talking about today. So a space there for you to ask questions. And as usual, we'll come to those at the end. And I think we're very well placed with the two individuals I have with me today to answer those questions. So we'll come to those at the end of the session. But for today, here's our learning objectives. As I say, it's a big area, but this whole area of CRP is really coming to the fore now. And so what we want to do is look at the changing risks as clients move from accumulation to decumulation of pensions wealth. Obviously, it's a long journey that people have from investing pre and post-retirement. What does that journey look like, and what are the differences between those two particular stages? What are the challenges? And identify the key stages in developing a centralized retirement proposition. If you're wondering what CRP stands for, then there's your answer. But what does that look like? What are the structure? What's everyone talking about in terms of the science of retirement and what has to sit behind a proposition? And then explore the main approaches to evidencing capacity for loss. Again, another buzz phrase at the moment, and defining a personalized sustainable withdrawal rate. So it's not just about annuities. We'll touch on a number of other things besides, but let's kick off with just some of the comments that are being made around CRP just now. So CRP, everyone's talking CRP. Oh, I see. Good job we didn't call it centralised retirement advice proposition there, Dave. But a lot of talk around this at the moment. Very topical. Seems every week there's something in the press around CRP. But what does it all mean? I think a lot of advisors, when it comes to consumers who are invested and perhaps planning on invested even post-retirement or into retirement, already operate a proposition for their sort of investment journey. Dave, do you want to explain what's going on pre-retirement, and then we'll see how that changes?
Yeah, well, I think just the first thing, I wouldn't mind just sort of building on your little headlines there that we saw on the slide before. I think one thing that we are already sort of noticing is that the acronym CRP, the statement centralised retirement proposition, there's already a certain amount of confusion in the marketplace,
right, okay.
In terms of what that really means. And I think there's also a level of, and it's an understandable level, maybe of cynicism from some of the advisor community that maybe it's just a marketing ploy, maybe it's just a way of asset managers or whatever just trying to find another way of promoting their solutions specifically into the retirement space. Okay. What I think, certainly from my perspective as an independent consultant and as an associate at Finalytic, where we see CRP is very much as a much broader, more holistic approach to a robust retirement proposition.
Right.
And it's very much more around advice and advisor as opposed to solution and product.
Okay.
So I think I just wanted to start there. But I think certainly, as you've got up on the screen, let's be absolutely honest, CRP, I suppose, is nothing more than a corruption of CIP.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and so, probably starting with CIP is a good place to start, because something like 80% of advice firms now have some form of centralised investment proposition.
Yes.
And I suppose it's worth being clear, why do they have a centralised investment proposition at the heart of their business? And I think the answer to that is fundamentally because it has become the driver, the engine room almost, of the post-RDR advisor business model.
Okay, yes.
Where it's very much about attracting and growing client wealth and trying to do that in a way that creates a level of consistency and robustness and repeatability, which leads obviously to good customer outcomes, first and foremost. But the other sort of benefit of a CIP, from an advisor perspective, is it really creates a scalable and consistent way of managing money, which is then really building the value into their business.
Okay.
So, a KIP becomes quite a crucial part of most advisor business models. And as we've got here, I think this is a fair representation of what a KIP generally looks like, which is normally a consistent approach to analysing and assessing the client's attitude to risk.
Yes.
So often a firm will be using just one particular tool to actually arrive at that particular sort of way of working out the client's risk. That leads out to a consistent risk profiling score.
Okay.
Yeah, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Normally somewhere between 1 and 10, typically. That equally then suggests a standardised asset allocation for that level of risk that the client is prepared to take. The investment solutions then come in at this stage, and those investment solutions will typically be maybe a range of multi-asset funds for clients with more modest wealth, then possibly model portfolio services either in-house or out-house for the core client bank, and then maybe DFM around the edges. And then last part of the process, I suppose, for most KIPs is the need to periodically rebalance those investments to keep them within the risk parameters from the risk tool and the risk output.
Okay.
So that's really why KIP sits at the centre of most advisor businesses. And although they weren't consciously built for just accumulation, that's certainly where they've tended to be used up until obviously a complete change of rules that we obviously witnessed in 2015.
So these are this is the methodology then of running an investment portfolio based on the client's risk and I suppose having some evidence behind why a firm has done what they've done in terms of advice pertinent to that individual client. But one of the things that we get feedback on is that the clients are invested pre-retirement or using a centralised investment proposition. They remain invested potentially as they go into retirement and through retirement. Is a CIP on its own, fit for purpose in both stages of that journey, or is there something else that people need to be?
That's a very, very good question. I think the answer potentially is that a typically constructed CIP that most advisors run at the moment arguably can be made perfectly fit for purpose for retirement.
Yeah.
But it needs to maybe acknowledge and cater for some of the variances that apply between potentially the accumulation stage and the decumulation stage.
I know you often use that mountain analogy. I think I've got it here to describe those two differences. Do you want to talk us through?
Yeah, and I think to start the mountain analogy, I know you were going to make some sort of quip about my firm being called Flat Mountain, the mountain analogy I think works very well in terms of just trying to be a metaphor for what is happening between a client building their personal wealth with the help of an advisor. So you could see that as climbing the mountain, and then as they become reliant on that wealth to fund their retirement, that's, if you like, coming down the mountain.
Yes.
And I came across a particular statement which I think really helps to maybe get the priorities in order in terms of sort of understanding the differences between those two journeys. Because if you went out in the street, or even maybe outside in the office here, Martin, and we asked people, what's the objective of a mountaineer?
Okay.
A typical layperson will probably respond by saying, well, stupid question, it's to get to the top of the mountain.
Yep.
If you actually ask that question though of somebody who has trained for years and is qualified and experienced in climbing mountains, and there's a guy in particular, Ed Heistrus, who's climbed Everest 7 times, if you ask him that question, his answer is getting to the top is optional, getting safely back down is mandatory.
That's a very good point. Coming down is always more difficult. I've got the trousers to prove that.
Well, I mean, arguably, more deaths occur in the death zone on Everest. Is the first 10% of the descent.
Right. Okay.
And yet, there's no doubt that coming down the mountain potentially in the context of what we're talking about here is a different journey. And if we try and take that that little story and apply it to the advisor-client relationship, then really maybe what we should be sort of acknowledging is that the advisor's primary objective has got to try and ensure that the client's wealth lasts for their whole retirement. And maybe having done that, by all means start looking at legacy planning, etc. But ensuring that the client's wealth lasts throughout retirement is absolutely essential.
So coming down the mountain, new risks apply, different process to be sort of
going up the mountain again. If we continue with this metaphor, going up the mountain. If you sort of take a step back and think about the theory, the philosophy that lies behind all of this stuff, going up the mountain, there is really only one very well trodden path. Okay, from a point of view of the rules and the principles that are being used in building that client's wealth. And that journey up the mountain is really all about trying to maximise the return that the advisor can achieve for the client, cognizant of that client's level of risk that they're prepared to accept. So their risk appetite. And the way that is delivered and brought to life is based on research and evidence, which is primarily supported by modern portfolio theory. And the efficient frontier. So that's the route up the mountain. It's a fairly consistent route up the mountain. Yes, you've got personalised goals and everything else, but the actual journey is being controlled and evidenced by that particular sort of methodology.
I suppose it's how much can how do I build this mountain? How do I fund and build the fund that I'm looking for? We've got some few things that you've listed there: attitude to risk. What's my allowance in terms of what I can pay, and certainly you've got that time horizon. I guess if things go wrong, you've got time to.
You can always have a plan
to sort it out.
Absolutely.
And so your analogy for down the mountain then.
Down the mountain. This is where I think that a KIP, a centralised investment proposition, needs to be sort of strengthened to cater for these sort of things. Coming down the mountain, there are effectively a few different routes that you can take. And those routes have maybe different risks attaching to them. And again, I like my analogies. You'll learn this as you go through this. But if as a ski instructor you've managed to get your novice skier up to the top of the mountain, would it be wise to then suggest that novice skier goes down the black run?
No, probably not.
Probably not. Because the risks,
it's not good.
The risks associated with doing that would be probably unacceptable. So probably the green run would be more appropriate. But the reality is that there are different routes down the mountain, which we'll touch on in a little while, and that therefore, if not acknowledged within the investment approach, will start to potentially undermine exactly what a kit was designed to do in the first place. Was to try and ensure this level of robustness and repeatability that leads to good customer outcomes. So recognition that the journey down the mountain is different. Certainly the first part of the descent is particularly risky, and it's important to understand what risks exist, what risks the clients are prepared to take, what risks that they're not prepared to take.
I think I've seen you speak about sort of the first decade of coming down the mountain impacts quite significantly on the rest of the journey, and you've got the risks noted here, the new things that people need to take into account. Longevity risk, sequencing risk, and pound cost ravaging is something that I think people are really aware of now. And that whole aspect of not how much can I save, but how much can I spend. Might be a good time here to just have a bit of a poll question around that, just to sort of get the interaction going before we sort of move on in terms of that consideration of a process beyond the CIP. So folks, you've got a question there around a centralised retirement proposition. and whether you already operate a centralised retirement proposition. It'd be interesting to know what proportion of people already operate something specific to the retirement process, sort of over and above the normal CIP. So we'll wait till those votes to come in, and then we'll move on to see exactly, Dave, your thoughts around what CRP
to maybe help people answer that. I think just to go back almost where we started, a CRP, is not possibly how it might be portrayed, in my opinion anyway, portrayed elsewhere, which is that it's just an investment portfolio tilted towards producing more income. That is sometimes what is badged as a CRP.
Right.
It's just purely a portfolio which has been tilted more towards income than growth.
Okay.
If that's what maybe someone believes of the CRP, then they may answer yes to this question. Potentially, as we go through, though, they might start to see that it's a broader issue than that, especially when you try and take a few steps back and think about what's driving the advice and what's driving the solutions that are being used. Okay,
so different perceptions of what CRP might be, and different commentators saying different things about it, of course,
absolutely,
which is obviously going to
be often from a position of vested interest.
Oh, right, okay. Well, we'll have a look at that. I like the skiing analogy. Just memories of Chamonix coming back there, painful memories of skis going off the edge and all the rest of it. But
you live to tell the time.
Well, that's the main thing.
You got down when you got safely down.
Well,
there's another matter.
It was an interesting technique. Let's just say that. But obviously, very pertinent to what we're talking about today in terms of that journey down the mountain that you've been talking about. So I like that analogy. I'm going to use that in the future, if you don't mind. Jolly good. Right. So let's just see what people have said around that. So. A good percentage of people using centralised retirement proposition, but the good news is that there's lots of people wanting to find out more about exactly what this looks like and really put that science behind the retirement journey.
And yes, I think something just look at those results briefly. I mean, as I said earlier, CIP has gone way beyond the tipping point. It's now, as I say, 80% adoption or even more. Those results that we just looked at there suggest that it's the other way around when it comes to CRP, which I would expect, to be quite honest, because CIP as a concept and a construct had its roots pre-RDR, but really came to the fore post-RDR. Really, the whole concept of this centralised retirement proposition in terms of relevance only really came in as a result of pension freedoms. So it's a newer concept.
Yes.
And you would expect it to be not as embedded, but clearly we've still got some way to go maybe before that reaches a tipping point.
Yeah, certainly pension freedoms have been the trigger point for this coming all to the fore, and
absolutely.
A few years on now, really looking at what processes people might want to put behind all of that. So I mean, just on your thoughts in terms of the CRP. I noticed on this diagram here you've put together, David, you've still got CIP in the middle of this, but you've got some extra bits around the outside. Do you want to just talk us through
what
where we're going?
What I fundamentally believe in, is that what CRP doesn't necessarily necessitate is the abandonment of a CIP.
Right.
I think a centralised investment proposition in concept can be totally suitable for retirement, but it needs to maybe take reference and recognition to the areas where there is this difference between going up and coming down the mountain.
Okay.
And fundamentally, what we're saying here really is that if you maybe look to the sort of areas that we're covering on there, so there are 6 elements that are showing up around the CIP.
Yeah.
If these elements are sort of considered by advisors and they have systems and processes put in place to deal with these, then arguably the CIP that they use for accumulation can become perfectly usable for decumulation.
Right.
They may still want to visit the philosophical debates around, do I use a cash buffer? Do I use natural yield? Those areas you might want to change. But what this effectively enables is if you're using a CIP with, let's say, model portfolios, which are very much geared to growth, straightforward unit encashment across that approach works just as well as anything else. When you look at the evidence and the research that has been done, cash buffering and other bits and pieces don't actually necessarily improve outcome. They don't reduce the outcome, but they don't necessarily improve it over the whole retirement journey.
Right.
So by building around the KIP, you can make it perfectly fit for purpose. And there are 3 key areas that really need to be in place to turn a KIP into a CRP, if you
Okay.
like. And those are these three here,
All right, okay.
which we'll look at in a little bit of detail, bearing on in mind. Obviously, we've not got a huge amount of.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're looking at this first one in terms of the consistently applied and documented advice principles, and you mentioned that this phrase sort of retirement philosophy and how perhaps that's sort of changing, and particularly with all the options that are open now. But you've got this sort of changing advice principles, solutions to advice. Do you want to just talk us through your thinking around
as we saw
this?
sort of earlier. So the starting point of a KIP, generally speaking, is assessing the client's attitude to risk.
Yes.
But to make a KIP into a CRP, we need to take a step back and recognise the fact that there are these different journeys down the mountain, whereas the fact that there's only one journey up the mountain. And these different journeys have been researched and evidenced. And if we understand the differences that are driving those different options, then you can maybe start to see things a bit differently. So what we've got here, this is just a visual, just to try and describe maybe where we've come from.
Okay.
Yeah? So if we look at, especially before we got to pension freedoms, what this visual was just trying to show us is that we had effectively a solution-led approach, which was driven fundamentally by the amount of money that somebody had. Yeah. And therefore, people maybe who had lower amounts of money, and correspondingly therefore, but it wasn't really necessarily consciously considered, a lower capacity for loss. They would normally be suggested a risk-led solution, i.e. an annuity. Yeah?
Right. Yes.
Above a certain line, our black line, horizontal line here, above a certain line, then the solution started to become investment-led. Yeah. And it would be a cap drawdown, or for those wealthy enough who could satisfy the then minimum income requirements of either 20,000 or 12,000, then they had access to the level of flexibility which now everybody has got access to, whether they've got 10,000 or a million. Now that line that differentiated between risk-led and investment-led was primarily an arbitrarily applied line, sometimes from a compliance department or from a commercial calculator for business, and quite often that line was about £100,000. Does that sound?
Yeah, I remember the FCA was saying, at the time, I think they were saying things like it was unlikely to be suitable for under a certain amount, let's say 100,000. But this offered some protection, though, didn't it, Dave? In terms of, you had, even with cap drawdown, you had your GAD limits, and obviously some people still do if they're going down that route. And then flexi drawdown, you had to have your minimum income requirements. So there were some protections built into that. So there were some advantages to that as well, I think. Were there not? Or?
There absolutely were. I mean, although I think it was unfortunately a combination of sort of economic circumstances that created some pressures within that system. The reality was that actually with the approach that we had before pension freedoms, it was strictly speaking impossible for clients to run out of pension wealth. Because of the need to satisfy the minimum income requirement if they wanted to have true flexibility. Or the action of cap drawdown, cap limits on drawdown. So absolutely there was some protections in there. But I think where we're going with this is, and again, over the years, if I had £1, for every time an advisor that I've had dialogue with over the last few years has said, yeah, David, don't forget, we don't sell products or solutions anymore. We advise. That's our currency. That's our value proposition. It's our advice. So if that is the case, if that's where we've headed as a result of RDR, the move to asset under management business model, etc., then really maybe the way that the retirement income advice market should be approached is from an advice perspective and from the fundamental principles that maybe apply. And what this is effectively saying is that maybe how a robust centralised retirement proposition should look and where it should start is a recognition that potentially where we've got our horizontal line now in a different place, below, if a client has wealth that effectively sees them below that line, then the advice philosophy, the advice principles that the advisor should, basically use with that client should potentially be different from the advice principles that they might harness the clients who are above this line. And this line, rather than the one previously being an arbitrary number, which was not client specific, with this approach, what this gives the advisor the opportunity to do is to be absolutely client specific, because this line represents a way of assessing, truly assessing the client's personal capacity for loss.
Okay.
So it's a way of almost replacing minimum income requirement
Yeah.
with a personalised way of assessing the client's capacity for loss. If they effectively fall below that line, then the advice approach should be that should be adopted is one which has a label.
Yeah. Okay.
We haven't had a chance to explain that label as yet,
okay.
but there is this label, safety
Right.
first. Fundamentally, what that is effectively saying is that you need to adopt an approach where you're taking a certain level of risk off the table for a certain amount of the client's regular expenditure. Above the line, then we're introducing another title here, probability driven, and this is just all about, okay, if you're going to be invested in the markets, you should be continuing maybe with your same sort of investment philosophies that you're doing in accumulation, but you should be using stochastic modelling techniques to work out the probability of achieving what the client's looking for, and also harnessing what we're going to look at in a little while, which is sustainability controls.
I think from the sounds of it, you're very much, singing from the same song sheet that we've been singing from here at Just for a while, in terms of that whole area of capacity for loss, and making sure that somehow that is, really upfront in terms of the whole thing, because that running out of money and the importance of capacity for loss, whereby, if you lose part of your fund, clearly that is going to affect your sustainability of income, and having that down in pounds, shillings and pence. And I know we've got this slide here, which kind of goes some way to explaining the sort of change in focus on capacity for loss in the time.
Absolutely, and for me, and this is actually probably the sort of fundamental point on which most of the rest of this hinges, because from my perspective, if you look at what is capacity for loss on the journey up the mountain, all it really is really part of the process of trying to ascertain a client's risk appetite, their overall attitude to risk.
Yes.
And the way that capacity for loss comes in to that part of the journey is really just almost, it's a behavioural overlay to try and give some sort of indication as to what level of discomfort is a client prepared to take in terms of investment volatility before they maybe chicken out and basically sell the funds. Whereas when you go into the accumulation, there is a growing view, and I certainly subscribe to this, that actually capacity for loss becomes a quantifiable and measurable matter of fact.
So people talk about tolerance for loss as well, don't they? Very much in the pre-retirement. Is that kind of that nuance there? Does that?
Yeah, I think. I mean, so for me, it's about it's about risk appetite going up the mountain.
Yeah.
But then fundamentally, it's about risk capacity. First of all, coming down the mountain before you even think about risk appetite. So if you can actually calculate and evidence that a client does not have the wealth to to withstand certain market volatility, then they could be an 8 or 9 on the risk claim.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't be taking that. You should be recommending that they take that risk if they haven't got the capacity to absorb the investment volatility that might come with it.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed in one of the recent FCA papers was this terminology starting to be used around financial resilience.
Yeah.
So how, what would happen to somebody's circumstances if they lost their main source of income for a period of time? And I think there's a direct time to those sorts of things. It's getting that part of the jigsaw in, that sort of foundation, I suppose, before we go any further. And this will be one that's familiar to you. The old Maslow's triangle sort of adapted to capacity for loss. I know we've talked in the past about different levels of risks for different parts of this, and obviously from where we come from a Just perspective, and I'd be interested in your views from your side of things. There seem to be those different approaches for filling in those red boxes, and of course our specific area has been annuitization and making sure that's that's covered in that way. But that's not the only route, of course, is it? And I know that we talked in the past about this whole difference between essential and discretionary income, and you often use that analogy of the pound coin.
Yeah.
Would you want to go through that?
Yeah, I think this to me links totally into what the regulator has said in the past around the relevance of capacity for loss. Now, for me, there's a bit of a disconnect at the moment because its capacity for loss seems to be completely focused on investment and investment volatility, which is absolutely appropriate as you go up the mountain. But as you go down the mountain, really, I believe capacity for loss should be focused on the sustainability and security of income, especially essential income, because if you use the analogy of the pound coins, a pound that is going to go into somebody's gas meter, is always going to be required, and that's going to be required throughout life. Whereas a pound that's going to buy an ice cream on holiday is a nice to have, and if you can't have the ice cream, it's not the end of the world. No, okay. And if you look at, there's not a huge amount that the regulator has actually said on capacity for loss compared with working out clients' risk appetite. But in FG 1105, which was actually an FSA document, but on the footnote on page 3, makes this statement that if any loss of capital would have a materially detrimental effect on their standard of living, then this should be taken into account in assessing the risk that they are able to take.
Right.
Now, I read that, and maybe people would argue with me, but I read that, think, okay, well, what we're effectively saying then is that a client has no capacity for loss on the asset that is supporting their essential spending, because if they can't have their essential spending, that will create a materially detrimental effect into their living standards. So what this, I suppose, is really sort of recognising is that there is different priority attaching to different levels of income, and back to that, maybe that advice-led approach where we were talking about this label of safety first. What safety first fundamentally is suggesting is that you adopt, whereas we said before that the journey up the mountain is driven by modern portfolio theory, maybe this is all about asset liability matching or liability driven investing, where you are using particular assets to match particular liabilities. And if you see essential spending as a liability, then you have a particular asset to use to match against that liability. And that asset should be, in a broad sense, guaranteed income, guaranteed sources of income, be that state pension, be that DB benefit, whatever, but any gap should be filled.
Okay, I mean, certainly you get no arguments from asking, in terms of ensuring that piece. Obviously, that's our area of expertise, and we'll come on to that a little bit later. But there are other ways, obviously, of looking at that, which I know we'll come on to in terms of that probability approach as well. But of course, all of this is worth mentioning. I think it's not really necessarily all about the pension side, is it? This can apply to people's assets across the piece, can't it? It's not just about what they do with their pension.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's actually crucial now that advisors should be, and I'm sure the vast majority are, working on a holistic level, and it is very much about looking at their overall wealth, and obviously with the changes that pension freedom's brought in, depending on the level of wealth that the client has, quite often the pension will be the last thing that they're going to draw on, because they've got maybe wealth elsewhere. But you're right, the beauty of a well-constructed centralised retirement proposition is effectively it's wrapper agnostic. It is a holistic way of advising their clients in retirement, within which you should have a view and a policy on the most tax efficient way of extracting that client's income requirement. So it is about sources of guaranteed income for essential, as we've said, but it might equally include drawing down on some equity from the house at times to maybe maintain the IHT position of the pension. So
I mean, one of the things that I think people like, I mean, is this whole aspect of some sort of rule of thumb around all of this, and then there's been a lot of documents around. Is it 4%? Is it 3.5%? Is it something else? But there is more science behind it than that, isn't it? I mean, presumably 4% might be the right number for one person, but it can be a completely different number for somebody else. I know there's some factors that go into this, which I think we can go into a bit more detail, but defining that sustainable level of income, and even if we come on to the question, is one sustainable rate the right thing anyway? So we've got all these different things that are impacting on this, which might mean, well, okay, these are great in theory, but different things are going to happen to different clients. They're going to be invested in different places.
And for me, I think whereas sequence risk has been a very, very well talked about topic since pension freedoms, I think that we're now moving into a situation where sustainability of withdrawals, evidencing that sustainability, is becoming a very, very big issue. I think where this is particularly relevant is, okay, you might have some clients who are suitably wealthy, that they are never going to really be challenged with the risk of running out of money. They want to take ad hoc bits and pieces here and there. But for what I believe to be the vast majority of clients that maybe still want something that looks and smells a bit like a paycheck every month,
Okay, yeah.
then being able to manage a client's expectation around what that really looks like based on a given pool of assets is very, very important. But I think, again, what we've witnessed is the introduction of things like the 4% rule to the UK advisors. It's been around for 20 odd years, but it was never relevant before pension freedoms. But I think the way that it's maybe been put into the advisor population in the UK up until now has meant a lot of advisors have dismissed the framework on the basis that a rule of thumb cannot apply to a wide group of clients, because not all clients are homogenous and have the same needs. But I think the danger that we've therefore experienced is that what is a very, very usable and workable framework that can replace the framework that we had before maybe is being ignored because of what is the perceived inflexibility of the rule of thumb.
Okay. Well, let's have a look at very briefly at some of the couple of different theories that sit behind this. I know this is one that you've used a number of times via Finalytic, in terms of some of the theory, and then you've got this sort of looking backwards approach and then looking forwards. But this is very much in the sort of looking backwards of what has happened and trying to assimilate that for what might happen in the future.
Yeah.
But there are some things that don't quite necessarily fit with every client on this. Do you want to talk us through this very briefly?
For me, all this is something that Abraham Finalytic did a while ago now, I suppose. And what Abraham was looking to do was just to bring into the UK the methodology and theory that Bill Bengen used when he created this 4% rule. And just look at it and establish whether it was ever really appropriate in the UK. Morningstar have done some similar work as well. But what this is effectively showing, each of these blue bars represents a 30-year period, going back in time to 1900. So that first bar on the left is 1900 to 1929, the second bar 1901 to 1930, and so on. And the orange line over the top is effectively representing with hindsight, what the sustainable withdrawal rate would have been for that particular retiree for over that 30-year period. And I think the only why I think this is worth looking at, why I think it just evidences the importance of looking at the framework, is that this, in one picture, evidences the challenge that every advisor faces when they sit next to a new retiree. Because what they don't know, and I need to get my glasses on here to try and remind myself of the numbers, but what they don't know is, are they sitting next to a 1936 retiree, if you like, in essence, i.e. someone who has a pretty poor journey, or are they sitting next to somebody at the start of a 30-year retirement who's going to enjoy a journey more like in the 1980s, where, out of a £100,000 fund, somebody could have started by taking £11,000, i.e. 11% of the fund, had that subject to CPI for the whole 30 years, and would have still had £1 left at the end of 30 years. Apply that to the person who retired in the 1930s. I know you could turn around and say this is very historic, but the reality is, using all of this data, you are encapsulating world wars, you're encapsulating all sorts of things. So it's a good sort of benchmark. But that summarises the challenge that every advisor faces. And if the client's expectations are not being managed somewhere between those lines, then that potentially creates some areas of risk for the.
So we're talking about what is deemed to be a safe withdrawal, the theory behind a safe withdrawal rate. Looking at those 30-year periods, what's the worst one that you would have got as a 30-year period? That's what safe withdrawal. So it's nothing more, more or less simple than
that's where it starts. That's sort of sustainable withdrawal rate version 1.0. That's where it started. But the realisation is that to get those numbers that you're seeing there, that certain things were assumed. And what we're going to go on to, I think, is show you that maybe if you set those assumptions specific to a client, you get different answers.
And then here's the one that, to me, that seems counterintuitive. This is the sort of looking forward stochastic type approach, isn't it? Where the message here is that, that to me, that looks like the more somebody has in equities, the more likely they are to have a successful outcome. But isn't that counterintuitive?
Well, yes and no. I mean, this is the evidence. This is the research. And again, this was brought up initially by Bengen and has subsequently been confirmed again and again. Is that having sufficient equities within a portfolio is arguably what drives the sustainability of a portfolio over time.
Yeah.
What we tend to see, which to me is counterintuitive and not evidence-based, is that what a lot of advisors do at the moment to recognise this move from accumulation to decumulation, and arguably, I suppose, to tip their hat to the client's capacity for loss, is they take a client who was maybe a 50-50 balanced portfolio investor, and they go into retirement and put them in 30% equities.
Right. Okay.
And in so doing, they've effectively reduced the likelihood of that portfolio being able to sustain a certain level of withdrawal because they've lowered the equity content.
Yeah.
So absolutely, Bengen's research suggested that anything up to 75% equity gives you the best outcome, but there's not many clients and not many advisors, I would suggest, that are probably happy to recommend that level of equity.
You've got to kind of strap in for the journey on that one, haven't you?
Really, you've got to be prepared for a bit of a rocky road.
Yeah, but you're right. I think that there are some, and I know lots of businesses have been doing sort of ready reckoners on this, which I'm sure are very helpful. I know Finalytic have got one, a number of providers have got these, but there are some variables, aren't there, in terms of, what the different, around what is actually included in those assumptions.
Yeah, for me, I talk about effectively to get something of actual meaning for a client, there are 5 variables that you set for the client's personal circumstances.
Yeah.
So the first one is how long is the money going to be needed for? On the original research that we've just been looking at there, the time horizon was 30 years.
Yes.
Is that still appropriate now with increasing longevity, etc., debatable. Inflation assumptions in terms of the spending that you're modelling. Are you modelling a spend that's going to be flat in actual terms?
Flat
mountain, absolutely. and therefore reducing in real terms, or do you build in inflation assumptions? What equity exposure, what portfolio are you going to be using? Very importantly, what fees are going to be incurred in the journey? Because when the original work was done by Bengen, no fees were assumed.
No.
So you have to build in portfolio fees, platform fees, advisor charge, etc. And then what level of probability, what level of security, what level of certainty do you want to try and get within your outcome? Because what this is all about is self-insuring longevity risk. You're staying in the markets, you're self-insuring longevity risk. This is trying to give you some sort of measure as far as what is likely to be achieved. The higher the level of probability that you want to work to, the more certain the outcome will be, but therefore the lower level of withdrawals you'll be able to take.
Yes.
Because you want to be more certain that they're going to be arrived at. And where you set those 5 dials will determine a client's personalised sustainable withdrawal.
Yeah,
not a rule of thumb.
Yeah, because most things that I seem to read, when you think about the advice charge, the fund charge, as you say, the term could be different from what the client actually needs. The asset allocation tends to be sort of a 50-50, but it might not be the case. And all of these things will have that impact. And it's interesting to look at, some of the figures in terms of what people are doing. This is certainly from the original or the interim report last year on ROR. I know it's been updated recently, but it's interesting to see, given everything you've talked about there, Dave, in terms of the science behind it and what's sustainable and, are we taking into account charges and so forth, the sorts of levels of income that people are taking. So this excludes people who take total encashment or your zero income clients. These people are actually taking a regular income. What are they taking? We see that actually lots of people are taking far in excess of even that rule of thumb, whether that's right or wrong, around that. But there could be reasons for that, of course, couldn't there?
Exactly. These might not be might not represent their total wealth, etc. So I think you need to treat those sort of numbers with a certain amount of caution. But certainly I've seen a lot of research that does suggest that maybe people's expectations of what they believe is a number that they can take out is quite often a long way in excess of what research suggests is really really maintainable, and that is storing up potentially some issues. For the future.
But what we don't know from this graph is whether people are doing something different in the early years. So, one of the questions I was going to ask you, and I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, was actually, is one rate of income on a fund the right answer anyway? Because presumably, you talked about earlier about discretionary and an essential spending, and so would those have different rates of withdrawal and different risks anyway to being a combined scenario?
If you subscribe to the view that essential spending and discretionary spending should be treated differently, then you can model that. And for me, this modelling does a number of things. First of all, this does actually give you that line that we talked about in terms of the principles-led approach.
Okay.
This is a way of calculating a client's actual measurable capacity for loss.
Right.
But it's also maybe a way that you could use for a sort of a triaging process to establish whether you should be giving a client safety-first-led approach, or you should be giving them probability-driven advice principles approach. So what we've got here, just very, very quickly, 65-year-old couple. We're saying that they've got £8,000 worth of essential spending required after allowance for state pension and so on. Now we're going to model this to age 100 because there's a 24% probability of one of those couples still being alive at 100.
Okay.
And since we've said essential spending is required throughout life, then really we probably need to model it for a pretty lengthy period. And we're going to model this on the basis that it needs to maintain purchasing power, because you need to do that with essential spending.
So CPI,
we're not. This is not about annuitising. This is trying to get a probability of success for a strategy of remaining in the market. And we can, and this is actually done using the Finalytic timeline tool.
Oh right, yeah.
Which is probably the only sustainable dual rate tool in the UK at the moment. And what this tells us, if you set those, so what we've done is set the 5 dials, those 5 sort of things, we've set them in a particular place, so a high level of probability, a 50-50 portfolio, etc. And what this is telling us is that we need, using a high level of probability over a 35-year period, to get £8,000 of income, maintaining its purchasing power throughout retirement, we need £335,000 of funds to do that.
Yeah.
Then we've got £12,000 worth of additional discretionary income, and we model that differently because it's discretionary. We maybe model it over a different time frame. Not everybody wants to spend discretionary money maybe after they're past their mid-80s, and we would also maybe model this on a level basis to more accurately reflect the spending patterns that people have in retirement.
Yes. And
what that then tells us is that to support that discretionary spend to a lower level of probability of success, to recognise that this is discretionary, so we can't buy our ice cream, we've just got to accept that sometimes, then that requires £174,000.
Okay.
So what this is effectively maybe saying is, so we've got 2 withdrawal rates here. So we've got a sustainable withdrawal rate on the essential spending portfolio of 2.4. We've got a sustainable withdrawal rate on the discretionary spending portfolio of 6.9. Now, if you sort of pull all that together, you probably end up with a number aggregate, which is not too dissimilar to the 4 number. But this is a way of properly quantifying the client's capacity for loss, because certainly if somebody hasn't got £335,000 and they want £20,000 worth of income, then arguably that would suggest to me very strongly that you need to take a cautious advice approach with these people. Look to secure as much of that as possible, accepting people's preferences to try and hang on to money these days. But this also is a point where you might sort of bring in the concept of, well, okay, you may not have a great deal of investment portfolio, but you've got some housing equity. So we bring that into the equation. But you could adopt this type of approach, almost have a red, amber, green triaging process, but certainly to identify whether a client fits below their personal capacity for loss line or above it, and then that would help the advisor know, right, I should be following a more safety-first driven approach, matching liabilities to assets, and making sure all essential spending is covered by guaranteed income as far as possible.
It strikes me that if this was on file and that this was what was agreed with the client, they've understood the risks on those 2 different areas, and obviously there may be more than 2 different elements to this, and it's documented. Presumably, even if it we have a correction in the market and it doesn't quite work out as we thought it would do, at least if you've got this on file, there's some science behind why we did what we did.
Exactly, and it is all about evidence, because at the end of the day, everybody other than the advisor will always be judging what the advisor's done through the lens of hindsight. The advisor does not have that benefit. This is all about trying to give them the protection. And linking into number 5 on our wheel around our CRP, which is a withdrawal policy statement, this type of information gets captured in the withdrawal policy statement, which then sets out the journey for the advisor and the client. So it's all about mapping it out and protecting
Yes.
the advisor from future issues around, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, and it's the importance of review really starts to come in. I wanted to bring Tony in at this juncture as well, Tony, because from the point of view of, obviously the Just business is primarily around that sort of guaranteed income in retirement, so various ways of looking at that. But even if somebody is going down the route that Dave's been talking about there, in terms of the probability-based approach, for example, having that accurate comparison on file in terms of what a guarantee might do is obviously equally important, isn't it?
Yes.
If we know that we've got that capacity for loss and the cost of doing that and what needs to go behind that from a sustainability approach, then presumably we need a comparison between, how does that compare with what it would have cost them to simply insure it, for example?
Yeah, exactly. And this is where our expertise can come into play, and it looks like that's where we the importance of underwriting, particularly when we're looking at the wider aspects. When we're looking at annuities, might even be funding further ahead to perhaps long-term care, but even if you're then assessing that against maybe using property wealth, you need to have those benchmarks in place for your income. And underwriting sort of cuts across all of this, and this is where we can lend our expertise to this.
Yeah, and you've got if somebody, even if somebody's looking at invested approach initially, at some point moving to annuitisation, then obviously critical yield comes into play and making sure that's going to be accurate in terms of what can the client actually get based on their circumstances rather than just a standard rate or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some work on this before, where obviously critical yield has kind of fallen away a bit with this move to flexi access drawdown post pension freedoms. However, there is still, I think, a need when you're reviewing drawdown strategies, is to look every so often. You need to consider what the customer's set of circumstances are.
Yeah.
And by getting an underwritten quote, it will give you a benchmark income that you can then look at positioning all the rest of your investments against. So if you know that it's the difference between somebody getting 5% and 6%, that might be a whole different conversation that you then have with that customer as to how do you approach income, how do you approach your legacy planning. There's all sorts of stuff that can impact on.
Okay, that's great. So, I know you've done a lot of work in your articles and things like that, of really just reminding people, what people can get with regards to, the underwritten sort of side of things. And I think, some of these have raised a few eyebrows in terms of just reminding people that actually, Dave quite rightly mentioned that 2.4% on there, 95% probability there, albeit that's on an escalating basis. I think if you looked at a level, research shows that you're probably looking at about 20% higher if that was a level sort of basis. But then it is worth this comparison of saying, well, look, all annuities are not the same when it comes to this sort of thing, and we are starting to see some good rates coming back into the market.
That's right, and we've published some stuff onto our website. If you go onto the justadvisor.com website, there's sections on there we've updated loads of material on our approach to underwriting, but also we've included some average rates on there, just to give people an idea of what they can achieve now. But in particular, on this graph you can see on the screen now, for me, the one that I think is important there is that for the healthy rate, where for a 65-year-old, you're still being able to achieve an average of 5%.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, some of the slides we've been looking at earlier, where people are trying to figure out how much they can withdraw sustainably. If you then throw in the fact that you can get, for a particular purchase price, but if that person isn't particularly poorly, they can still get a rate of 5%. If you throw that into the mix, and also by ensuring some of that longevity risk as well for that money, that's got to be considered.
Yeah.
Now, if you start to underwrite them and the other conditions come into play and the rate increases, it only makes that story better. So
it'd be interesting to see, I think, if you had, looking at comparing the 50-50 sort of scenario a lot of the Bengham work was based on was, say, I don't know, a 70-30 equities, annuities rather than bonds, what that would look like when your income's coming from a different place and what the fund ends up on. I know you're doing some work behind the scenes on those sorts of issues as well.
Yeah.
But are we, we sort of talking here about, the ways of thinking about, that guarantee comparison, of course, are we still talking about enhanced and impaired annuities these days, or have things moved on so much? About that science and personalisation, yes. I would.
Yeah, this falls exactly into the points that Dave was making about personalising that sustainable withdrawal rate and the capacity for loss. No two clients are going to be the same. Their needs are going to be different, and this falls across to underwriting and the annuity market as well. So this is what it used to look like, where you would have a standard market, and then if they tripped over a qualification line and they were poorly enough, then depending on the severity of their impairment would dictate the type of rate that they got, and they kind of fell into whichever bucket that was suitable for them.
Yeah.
Those underwriting has moved on hugely since then, and our approach now has changed massively, where everybody gets their own rate. It's now a personalised approach. So if there's a handful of people in the room here, we would all get a different rate. So there is no one size fits all. Everybody gets their own rate, and you can get a personalised rate just with a postcode and height and weight.
Yeah, over which everyone's got one of those.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. As long as you've still got a pulse, then you should be able to get your own rate.
I know we've got another webinar that people might want to log into around information prompts. We go into a lot more detail around some of those issues. But here's 5 people that all look like if you had a question on the fact find saying, "Are you in good health?" I suspect that all 5 of those would probably say yes.
This is a classic example of that none of these people actually are poorly.
No,
and yet would they all get the same rate if there was no underwriting applied to this, and then they would all get a standard rate or a standard annuity? They would all get the same income, but that's not the case. So I appreciate we're sort of a bit tight for time, but just running through this demonstrates that actually just taking into account height and weight, marital status, the amount that they drink, and that type of thing. So lifestyle types of conditions demonstrates that there's quite a difference. There's £400 worth of difference there in income. So that can make a hell of a difference when you're building that into the overall decumulation strategy for that individual.
Yeah.
So it's crucial that gets included.
And I guess that needs to be reviewed each year. And in fact, you mentioned long-term care earlier, and people might take an invested approach there as well. And is that still the right route, whether it's for retirement or even later life, and that whole area of continually reviewing the client's circumstances to see whether and to review what rates you want to offer and so on. And going back to the point that Dave was making earlier around that there is more than one solution to all of this, and maybe that alternative to the sustainable income scenario on that essential income. A lot of people have talked for a number of years around sort of the whole blended approach, and again, it's about this, the alternative of insuring that essential income, and of course making that insurance premium as low as possible.
Yeah.
So you've got more to spend on freedom and choice.
Exactly. So, but perhaps being a little bit contentious, I've picked a guaranteed rate of income here of 4%.
Right.
Just to stir it up a bit, but this just demonstrates the difference. So coming at it a slightly different way, if you were looking to produce an income of 5%, 4%, this shows that depending on where you would fit in terms of how you describe your health, it correlates with how much fund is required to buy that income.
Yes.
And also then shows that obviously you've got more to play with. So it might be surprising that there's not as much capital required to secure that income. The rates are actually doing pretty well. Yeah.
Well, it just gives the other side of the equation and just looks at, again, going back to this CRP, we started talking right at the beginning around what's the advice philosophy in terms of the approach that people take. Dave went through that sort of principles-led situation around, well, evidencing the client's capacity for loss first, and then sort of building the journey from there. And obviously, as we've just seen, there are various ways of doing that. And again, the areas that that we're doing a lot of work on here at Just, of course, the planning tools. We've seen one that some results from the Phonetic tool there. I know we're building our own tools as well to help with this process. And of course, people can find out more through. I think you've put some articles together on the bits that Dave's been talking about there, and some other bits and pieces as well, Tony. So those are available on our website, I believe, already.
That's right. Yes. There's a whole new section on justadvisor.com. If you click onto that from the home page, it will take you through to all the relevant articles, which is sort of going into a little bit more detail that we talk about today. But yeah, have a read through that. And obviously you can, any questions that come off the back of that, then come through to our account managers and they can help you.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're nearly out of time, but just in terms of people wanting to find out more about this retirement risk conundrum and look at those various areas that we've discussed today, and some of the areas that we've not had time to discuss this morning, then we are running our advisor forums. I think this is the first announcement of these, although I think communications will be going out today as well. But those of you on the webinar, you have got first notification of these. In October, we will be discussing this area in a lot more detail in these advisor forum sessions. So there will be details coming out to you, but I'll just leave that there for a few moments. If you are interested in that and haven't yet received an email, then there's an email address at the bottom as well to find out more. But I'll just leave that there for the time being and just see if we've got any questions that have come along. Okay, here's one. I understand the concept of CRP. I understand the concept of CRP. Let me put the glasses on. But my clients want flexibility, and I can do all this through drawdown. Why do I need to bother with CRP? Well, Dave, I think you sort of talked about that a little bit earlier, that process of surrounding
for me, the construct and the point of the CRP, it goes above, far before the requirement for the solution. Okay, the solution for pension money, the default solution is now drawdown, but from a point of view of the advice principles driving the decisions, etc., for me, a CRP is all about, very, very quickly, it's to help the business to achieve exactly what they put the CRP in place for, which is to drive reliable, repeatable, good customer outcomes, and to continue to build the value of their business. So it's less about solution; it's more about a much more holistic.
Overriding thing is and it's the review process and the planning tools and all the other facets around there. What about this one? How does CRP work if I'm using the pension? That's a good question. Pension funds for legacy planning rather than income. So income for this person isn't necessarily the primary objective. It's unusual, I would suggest. If
the whole thing is about legacy, if they're not spending any money, then I think some principles of the CRP are still absolutely valid, because you need to maybe validate what the client wants to do. Again, the whole point of the CRP is not to be a straitjacket, but a framework within which you can cater to different client and circumstances. Where a client is maybe looking to take some income over their lifetime but protect some for legacy, then you can model that. So most of the modelling that we've looked at here and the Bengen stuff, etc., very quickly, was always looking to run the fund down to zero over a period of time. You can now just actually say, well, no, I want to try and make sure I've got, £100,000, £300,000 in today's terms still left over after a certain period of time. Model it. You get a different number.
Okay, that's great. Listen, we're out of time really, so thanks for your attention on that, folks. Just before we go, you will get a questionnaire after the session as soon as we close down this end. Something will pop up on your screen asking you some questions. One of which is this one here around those 6 facets. And I say we've not managed to go through all of them in detail today, but certainly if you want to know more about any of those particular areas that we've discussed, then do take the time after the session to answer the few questions that will pop up on the screen. You will get your, obviously, CPD certificates, and we will publish this webinar on our website as well. But for now, thank you very much for your time this morning. I hope that's been useful for you. I've certainly picked up quite a lot of bits and pieces from Dave and Tony there. Thanks, guys, for coming on and chatting through that. And we will hopefully join you again at the advisor forums. But for now, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.